Hi, Stefan. I'm speaking with you on behalf of the Inopod podcast, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Our podcast explores the life cycle of startups, and in this episode, we're focusing specifically on startup innovation, which is why we've referenced parts of your book, How to Create Innovation, which hasn't yet been translated into Persian. The goal of today's conversation is to help our audience gain a deeper understanding of the concept of innovation in the context of startups. So, if you're ready, let's begin.
Fantastic. Absolutely.
Great. In your view, what's the difference between creativity and innovation?
Creativity is often linked to ideation, coming up with new kind of ideas. Yeah. That is relevant in particular parts, but I think there is a big misunderstanding out there. Most innovation is believed to be started off with ideation. That is what startups often do. They ideate. So they come up with many ideas. A recent newspaper article stated 100 ideas for one single to fly. But how do you identify those ideas? Like, how do you know whether this idea is inside the frame you want to leverage, yeah, or whether it's outside? How do you know whether this idea is effectively leveraging your distinctive capabilities? How do you know whether it's really contributing and leveraging and creating ultimately an unfair advantage? So ideation, in my opinion, doesn't work very well because it is ultimately playing the lottery. An alternative approach that I deem much better suited is strategically uncovering the important but unmet customer needs. And there is a methodology to do so, which is called jobs to be done. And by leveraging that methodology, you can actually, in a quantifiable and statistically verifiable way, determine and understand your important but unmet customer needs. And that should be the basis for innovation. And once you really know what important customer needs are not met, then you know precisely where you should be innovating. And this is what I think startups should be doing out there.
That's excellent. What do you think enables a startup to move beyond just a creative idea and turn it into impactful innovation?
Well, impactful innovation is once it sees traction, basically. Yeah, once it sees really uptake by a significant user mass, and most importantly, at some point, having a corresponding business value. Yeah, so to earn money, put simply. That's when it becomes impactful. And the basis of that is, again, identifying an important but unmet customer need, but it also relates to identifying a business model that is worthwhile, that could be exploited, and where users are indeed paying a price for in the end that makes the business viable. I think these are the key components.
Thank you. In academic literature, several models have been proposed to explain the innovation process, such as the linear model or open innovation models. How would you categorize a startup innovation within these theoretical frameworks? And do you think any specific model is particularly well suited for startups?
Well, I think ultimately startups should be exploiting any type of innovation. It can be customer-centric innovation, that can be marketing, that can be product innovation, that can be business model innovation, that could even go as far as, for some startups, doing really R&D, deep research and development, to revolutionize, for example, chemistry or physical facts, etc. This is what the Boring Company of Elon Musk, for example, does. It challenges physical norms. So a startup shouldn't limit itself to one particular type of innovation, such as open innovation or the others which I just mentioned, but leverage the type of innovation that best suits the means. Yeah? And there is no such type of startup innovation that is specific to startup. Quite on the opposite, startups should leverage any type that best fit ultimately.
Also, disruptive innovations like Uber and Airbnb have caused structural changes in industries, From the perspective of complex systems theory, how do such innovations impact market equilibrium?
That's a big one. That's a big question. So at some point in time, from complex systems theory, there is a balance, yeah, and an equilibrium between demand and supply. Yeah, they need to fit together. Now suddenly something weird happens. There is a disruptor who comes up with a new type of business model, such as Airbnb and Uber, which you just mentioned, or who has a new technology or a new type of product, or perhaps just a marketing innovation. So it can be disrupted by, again, different ways of doing innovation. That basically challenges the current status quo out there. That challenges the currently existing equilibrium. So that equilibrium doesn't exist anymore in the market. The equilibrium is disrupted by the disruptor itself, if you want so. So then basically the question is, how far can it go? That very much depends on the type of idea. For example, if it's a platform innovation, such as Airbnb and Uber, they are basically platforms who have brought together private assets, such as rooms or cars, into a platform that suddenly offers a new type of service, in this case, rentals or car sharing, etc. With those type of assets from private users, they were able to disrupt. And then the question is, how far can it go? At some point in time, there is a saturation effect. There is often a quality challenge as you continue scaling, because often these type of platforms, initially they manage quite well on quality, but at some point in time, quality is degrading. And last but not least, there are often regulatory changes and implications. So for example, in many cities around the world, Airbnb or Uber are actually banned. So at some point in time, these type of platform innovations often hit a roof, regardless if it is quality, if it is marketing penetration, if it's simple market saturation, or if it's about regulatory constraints. So there is basically a new equilibrium to be found, which automatically in the end happens once the new disruptor is hitting the wall, yeah, or the roof.
Thank you. And how can we analyze the long term sustainability of these innovations?
I mean, disruptors can be disrupted themselves. Yeah, I mean, and the latest example is we have seen the rise of artificial intelligence, heavily driven by ChatGPT. And now we have that DeepSeek model coming up from China, which seems to at least produce similar results, but with a fraction of the cost. So AI has disrupted AI, or the Chinese AI is disrupting ChatGPT, which has caused the biggest downfall of the S&P since its existence in over 100 years. So disruptors can be disrupted themselves. So I'm not sure if these days you really can come up with a great prognosis of how long a disruption lasts and can be sustained in the end. I think this is heavily context specific and heavily specific to the individual topic. Having said that, probably you could do forecasting, and you can do forecasting depending on how important that unmet customer need is. Yeah, if that unmet customer need is huge, as we have seen in with basically virtual assistants and AI, well, it's probably up for some good traction and growth. If the industry is small, it's probably another. The industry size is probably another phenomena. So probably you could come up, but I would have to think about that myself, with an analysis framework of the underlying factors that would allow you quite good prediction probably. But then, as said initially, you're not preventing disruption itself. Yeah? That can simply happen these days. And that is always led through technological change. Disruption always is leveraging technology change. That started when we have invented the fire. and later with all kinds of technologies. And today, well, it's digital innovations and digital technologies that ensure ongoing disruption.
Thanks a lot. So, from a technical standpoint, what do you think are the key variables for measuring the scalability of innovation? And how can we evaluate a startup's scalability potential during its earliest stages?
So the scalability of a startup certainly depends. There are a number of factors at play. The important but unmet customer needs we already talked about. There are technology limitations which could come into play, such as simple computing power. So for weather forecasting models or for high complexity models, you can only go as far as this. Then there is the readiness to pay. So how much value are we indeed offering from a customer perspective? And how much are customers really willing? And there is a great inertia in customers. Customers are often not ready to pick up new solutions because, well, they're quite content with their existing ones. So how big is the inertia of customers who are willing to stay where they are ultimately? And last but not least, I guess there is the ability to execute. So what is our ability to execute and really scale from an operations perspective? That is a key challenge for numerous startups, because as you continue growing, as you continue scaling, it's not just enough to scale the customer dimension. You have to scale operations, you have to scale finance, you have to scale HR. So you have to lift up the entire organization. And often startups hugely struggle with adapting to strong, scalable growth. So this is what large companies have perfected. And this is why I find it quite astounding that so many large companies indeed have equally problems scaling. And that often relates to them not being able to assess and access internal infrastructures such as their own customers, internal systems, etc. Similar to startups, they're often left alone.
Studies have shown that innovation in the business model is as important as innovation in product or technology. You've mentioned in your book that some startups have created innovation by changing their business model without changing their product. Do you propose any specific analytical model to evaluate innovation in business models?
Oh, absolutely. So perhaps to briefly provide some background, I mean, we have seen product innovation, marketing innovation. These are broadly the two most leveraged types of innovation out there. Business model innovation hasn't been used very often. Yeah, I mean, we have discussed the example of Uber and Airbnb, which is a great example of business model innovation, but most organizations don't use it. It's only 2% of all organizations out there that leverage business model innovation. And that is not a great state to be in, because business model innovation typically yields the biggest potential returns of all innovation, because it's difficult to replicate. Yeah, you can't easily copy and paste a new type of business model. Oh, fantastic. We got a thumbs up there. And since the competitors are not leveraging it, well, it often creates new types of markets that are difficult to copy. Yeah? So how can you become and leverage business model innovation? And I think what we have to understand out there is that business model innovation is, I mean, it can rely on luck, again, ideation, but that's playing the lottery. But fundamentally, how we apply business model innovation, or the types, how you can apply your business model, that has been understood since centuries. So let's take one example. So how do we do pricing out there? Has been figured out by thousands of companies out there since thousands of years. We clearly know how you do pricing. It's very unlikely that you'll figure out an entirely new way of pricing. And this example makes it clear, I hope, that pricing is based on patterns. Yeah, you can have ad hoc pricing, broker-based, or fees, or flat rate. There are these different types of pricing. These are simple patterns. So if you want to innovate your business model, you should be leveraging the underlying patterns. Yeah. And in the example of pricing, well, you just see if a different type of pricing will yield advantages. So you go through literally the list of patterns. Broker-based, am I making progress? Cash up front, why not? Flat fee, why not? Etc., etc. This applies to all parts of a business model. So in summary, I am saying that business model innovation depends on patterns. And those patterns can be strategically discovered, yeah, and leveraged. And we have actually made the analysis, and we have offered the world's first framework out there that summarizes 95% of the typical patterns you could be leveraging. So it's a simple list, structured by business model domain, of over 100 patterns that you could be leveraging. And they cover pricing, as I said, but they equally cover all other parts of a business model. So customer channels, customer relationships, value propositions, service propositions, operating model, the types of innovations, and so on. So feel free to leverage those business model types of innovation. We have got you covered. You can actually download that from our website, or in the book we have authored, How to Create Innovation. It's fully covered in there.
With the expansion of artificial intelligence and machine learning, some believe that future innovations will be shaped more by AI algorithms than by human creativity. Do you see the future of innovation in the form of human-centered innovation or data-driven innovation? How will this trend change the path of startups?
Well, currently I would view those very much as complementary. Yeah? So data-driven insights strongly support identifying new types of innovation. Yeah, and you can identify at scale important but unmet customer needs. You can identify current market data, and you can use analytics to assess your competitors. So all of that is complementary. Now, can AI currently come up with entire business models? That is actually a very interesting domain, which we are working on. Currently, I don't see artificial intelligence as being able to do that yet. Yeah, it can support human beings, it can support startups, it can support corporate innovators, but it doesn't replace us yet. Yeah, very clearly there are big gaps. We look into AI, and particularly generative AI, which is the biggest type of artificial intelligence. It's a very simplistic or relatively simplistic model where we simply predict the next word. Yeah, with that simple algorithm, I don't see a machinery currently that would be able to go all the way from identifying important but unmet customer needs to developing operating model, a business model, an elevator pitch, marketing material. That is a big universe, right? And it cuts across all disciplines to ultimately create a compelling business model and operating model and value proposition. So I think artificial intelligence, in summary, will complement humans and is supporting humans, but clearly we are far away yet from that replacing humans.
In your book, you stated that organizations should not fully outsource their key digital capabilities. Does this advice apply to all industries, or do some areas like SaaS or fintech require different strategies for managing their digital capabilities due to their unique nature?
So let me briefly introduce a framework here. So an astounding 80% of all processes and capabilities an organization have are not even industry specific. The way you do forecasting, the way you do finance, the way you do marketing, the way you do HR is very likely not specific to your industry. And these are an astounding 80% of all processing capabilities in a firm. Can you build competitive advantage in those areas? Well, I guess that is unlikely. Can you therefore outsource those? Oh, absolutely. So it's not those 80% that matter, it's the other 20%. And these other 20% are core factors and differentiating factors. And we typically differentiate with only 2 to 5% of what we're doing. These are the elements you can absolutely not outsource. Quite on the opposite, you should be insourcing those. You can't outsource how you differentiate, or at least if you would be outsourcing that, that would be very dangerous. Yeah. Now, 15% of an organization's processes and capabilities are typically industry specific, but here organizations are not better than their competitors. So here they're kind of battling head to head with their competitors, which means, well, it's still industry specific. You're battling with your competitors. So these are the items you clearly don't want to outsource either. Now, if we look at digital capabilities more in general, digital capabilities are for most organizations becoming core or even differentiating. Even physical firms in mining are these days, for example, becoming very much digital operations because they drive productivity, because they drive higher efficiency. And you don't want to outsource those very levers. So in general, and that applies to large organizations as well as startups, clearly you want to insource your digital capabilities. And that applies to really all organizations out there.
Also, in your book, you emphasize the importance of creating MVP and testing related hypotheses. In many cases, initial MVP data may lead to incorrect decisions. So, do you propose any specific approach to increase accuracy in validating MVP hypotheses?
Yeah, so basically, you're talking here about the false positives, I guess. Yeah. So you test at insufficient scale, and by basically just interviewing some passers-by on a street, which many startups do, and out of the 10 people you interviewed, 5 said, "Oh, well, we got this opinion," and boom. Yeah, was that representative? Probably not. So I think we need to look at it in 2 stages. And the first stage is problem solution fit, which is a stage which is coming before the MVP or the minimum viable product. And in that stage, you need to make sure that you have identified that important but unmet customer need, hopefully at scale. And here, so you start with qualitative interviews, but you harden it with quantitative on a quantitative scale by interviewing 100 people at least, or 200, with an online questionnaire. And research institutes can do that and recruit at this scale for relatively small money. I would view that as quintessential because it ultimately increases the investment security, that your startup is actually really on top of something. Once you have identified that important but unmet customer need, you want to identify solutions. Similarly, with the help of a research institute, you could already quantify that on a significant scale. Once you have run those 2 different types of quantitative validations, then and only then, I would argue, should you be going after an MVP. And the MVP is ultimately putting it in practice in a minimum viable fashion. But still enough. It needs to show the end-to-end startup capability and experience as if a customer would be buying it tomorrow. And it needs to validate this at scale. So an MVP only comes after you've quantified your important but unmet customer need, after you've quantified and gotten quantitative validation on your potential value proposition. And the MVP, again, needs to be validated in practice. Otherwise, you don't have the required investment security. And I think that's a key problem we have these days, because often startups want to be super fast, and similar corporate innovators also want to be super fast. And they do so at the expense of quantitative validation. And that is, currently we are seeing a 90% failure rate in startups out there. So everybody's running super fast, but everybody's failing. I'm going like, seriously, guys? I mean, why don't you start validating? I mean, that's the most essential step. Yeah. So I propose to take quantitative validation throughout that process much more seriously, because 1 million failure, and you very quickly get to significant expenses as you develop an MVP, is simply not making any sense, particularly if you can use quantitative validation with the help of research institutes for a couple of $1,000.
We read about the Unite framework in your book. Could you please elaborate on it a bit more for us?
Mm-hmm. So basically, we have authored this beautiful book this year titled How to Create Innovation.
Yes.
And that is ultimately building on a 5-year research effort into innovation. Yeah. So what we did is we analyzed 270 initiatives post-mortem, so failed initiatives. And we looked strategically into why do they actually fail? Yeah. Is it because they haven't achieved product market fit, because of the entrepreneur's team, which wasn't set up in the right way? Did they fail because of technology? Did they fail because of customers, etc.? And in total, we have uncovered 72 sources of failures. Yeah? However, there are 8 major failing parts. Yeah? And I think with the Unite models, we have helped to strategically overcome all of those problems in practice. And for us, a problem is also culture. I mean, you could argue this is a complex one, but if you understand the constituents of culture, so the building blocks of culture, you can model an innovation culture that actually supports you, but only if you understand it. Similarly, there is a methodology for uncovering important but unmet customer needs. Similarly, there is a methodology for innovating business models. So the Unite models have been designed to address all of the innovation challenges out there. Importantly, we do share those models open source, so you can access them. I mean, they're discussed in the book. You can access them in depth on our website with a whole lot more material behind that. And I think the problem we see out there is what we just discussed, Milan, is that 90% out of all innovation fail. And I think I don't want to live in a world where 90% of everything we innovate fails. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? I think if you apply the Unite models in a strategic way, you should at least be able to double and triple your chances of success. And if you do it really well, if you have been there a couple of times, so if you're an experienced innovator, you could be potentially achieving a success rate of 50%. Is that perfect? Clearly not. But it's a multifold improvement over where we are today. And that is what the Unite models can do to you. So I invite you to educate yourself, get the book, review the Unite models, use the potential. And this is the big challenge in general in our discipline, right? I mean, if you look into real estate, for example, 2/3 of the laws that govern real estate date back to Roman times. So 2000 years ago. So how we sell houses and how we rent apartments is fundamentally well understood. And it's codified into legal language and proper contracts, so we know how to do those things. In innovation, it's an immature discipline. We haven't really needed it in the past because technological change was so slow. But since technological change is totally going through the roof right now, organizations must innovate and they must mature their approaches to innovations. And this is what the Unite models ultimately deliver.
And if you had to give one key piece of advice to new entrepreneurs who have an idea but don't know how to turn it into a real innovation, what would it be?
Well, I think what we just discussed, educate yourself, on how to validate ideas, educate yourself, leverage the Unite models, etc. And the second biggest topic, that's the general piece of advice, but the number one, if we discuss the two sources of failures, the biggest two sources of failures is the number one issue is create the right setup for innovation. That's what particularly corporates struggle with. So corporate innovators often use the methodologies from their enterprises to do innovation, but that can't work because you can't leverage the same methods you do for execution improvement to build innovation. And many startups innovators often fail with that as well because, they have corporate backgrounds. So they use what they learned. Yeah. And that is great because, it's actually not great because it works in great organizations, in big organizations, but it can't be applied to a startup context. So number one issue of innovation is creating the right setup. And the second biggest topic, and I think we have discussed that a few times today, is actually identifying an important but unmet customer need. So look into that methodology called Jobs to be Done, which we equally discuss in the book. These are probably the two biggest recommendations I would give.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for taking the time to speak with us. I truly learned a lot from our conversation and hope to have the opportunity to talk with you again in the future. Wishing you all the best and goodbye for now.
Absolutely. So I would be happy to join another conversation with you, Milan. And I think it's a beautiful world. There is a lot to do. Go ahead and let's create successful innovation. Thank you so much for having me.